Hello, my name is Michelle, and you're listening to Profit is a Choice. On the podcast today is Renee Carman. She is the owner of Mandeville Canyon Designs, offering design services in New Hampshire and New York. Renee loves to design and balance with nature, and she carefully weaves a refreshing collection of color into the 5 earth elements. Her firm loves to use renewable resources and local artistry. Since 2004, they've specialized in interior and exterior design with a special emphasis on biophilic design. You're going to learn more about that in the podcast. The company also has a very strong social conscience and looks for opportunities to volunteer in the local community and beyond. This was such a beautiful podcast episode to record, learning about how Renee has merged her love of nature with design and kept true to her values and strengths, especially in the areas of connectedness and includer, was simply amazing. Bringing together not only earth elements but people to make the whole greater than the parts is seriously her superpower. I think that you're going to be smiling and humming a tune after listening. I know I am. Enjoy. Every day, empowered entrepreneurs are taking ownership of their company financial health and enjoying the rewards of reduced stress and more creativity. With my background as a financial software developer, owner of multiple businesses in the interior design industry, educator, and speaker, I coach women in the interior design industry to increase their profits, regain ownership of their bottom line, and to have fun again in their business. Welcome to Profit is a Choice. Hey, Renee, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. I am so excited to talk to you because you have quite an interesting journey in business, and you also have, I think, some really fascinating facets to not only your individual company, but into how you work within the community of interior designers and artists. And so I really want to be able to talk a little bit about both of those today. So, Renee, if you would you tell our listeners a little bit about how you got started in the interior design industry and a little bit about your business today?
Sure. I was probably a reluctant designer because I sort of grew up understanding a certain image or view of what designers were. And I knew from my background working on environmental committees and chairing environmental groups that was a really big part of my story. And so when I started thinking about design, that was really in the forefront of my mind. And I realized that I could probably still hold my values and create a company that might be a little bit different from what people were used to seeing in the interior design world. So as soon as I figured out how to marry those two ideas where I could still be working on supporting the environment and supporting local and sustainable and celebrating local artistry and things like that, it's almost as if the company just sort of appeared right in front of me and said, hey, you can do this now as long as you don't stray from what your true values are. So that's sort of how this company was designed. I grew up in Los Angeles and I was sort of a child of the 60s. So grew up in Mandeville Canyon, which is the name of the company, and always grew up communing with nature. I was always outside playing. I was always digging in the dirt. I was always finding ways to stay real close to the earth. So this seemed like it was a natural connection. And back in the 60s and the 70s in Los Angeles, there was also all this amazing architecture, whether it was classic mid-century, and then they were also combining it with a lot of earth elements, a lot of wood and stone and things. So I was really influenced by the way I grew up. And that sort of made this company evolve on its own. Sometimes I feel like I was just sort of standing back and watching it unfold.
Tell me a little bit before we continue on about the industry that you were in, where you worked to support the environment and those, causes prior to starting design. What did that look like?
This was a wonderful group. We lived in the Fairfield County area of Connecticut, and there was this sort of grassroots organization, which was a little environmental group. And our purpose was to sort of educate school kids, but the community at large, about ways that they could simply change their lives. We had programs in teaching kids how to recycle and how to compost. We gave all the kindergartners little recyclable lunch boxes and things like that. So through those efforts and going out and talking with the community and changing sometimes how, the grocery stores, we were big and instrumental in getting recycled bags and not using plastic so much. So I always had my hands in those kind of things. And we also had wonderful opportunities at that point to do some outreach beyond that. We were lucky enough to be near Martha Stewart, and she was kind enough to let us come on the show and do some recycling segments. So we were really able to get the ideas that we had in a very small grassroots project, which is really, really the way I love to work. I love to touch individually. I'm not quite the big get out the math kind of gal, but, working with people individually. And then every once in a while we get a wonderful opportunity like this. So I think from the very early stages, that was really important to me to make sure that that was part of our business. So that kind of set the stage for making sure that the choices I was going to make as a designer were to work sustainably, to try to keep stuff out of landfill. So I'm a big proponent of buying the highest quality materials you possibly can so that we're not throwing it away, we're reusing it. In our designs, we always look for ways to reuse and recycle, pulling old into new and that type of thing. And that our footprint, that our carbon footprint is really small. We try really hard to start local. We always start local and then build our way out there. We also have a checklist of things. So when we vet vendors, we're looking for their measure of sustainability, how committed they are to their environment, how far they truck things. When they say it's green, what does that really mean? So sometimes it's a little bit more of a process when we have, things in our collection, but the good news is that for our clients, we've done most of the groundwork. So when they come to us for certain things, we can say, oh yes, we have 3 or 4 vendors that are really going to fit your needs. So we try to get all of the sticky stuff out of the way so that when it comes to the design experience, we can just sit back and have fun.
My head is spinning with what you're talking about right now. Right? And Renee, I think in some ways, even all the way back, you were ahead of your time with this, right? Because I don't know that I remember until maybe the last 5 to 7 years that we saw as much of the bags that you would get at the grocery store where you carry your own, trying to be conscious of even some of those things and the fact that you had a consciousness of it even prior to that. So many things I love about your story, just to name a few, that you realized that you had certain values that were very tied to the environment, sustainability, nature, responsibility, and that you also were conscious that when you build into your design business, which, let's be honest, this type of industry can be built in a multitude of ways, but to build it in a way that also aligned with who you are. And as a business coach, that makes me excited because my goal is for each company that I work with to really build the business based on who they are, right? Not on what's expected. And so I love that you tried and have succeeded in building a company that took 2 things that you love to do and merged and married them together. And we both know there is not only a need for that, but there is a desire for that, because it's not enough to have a need if nobody cares about it. But there are people who truly want to have sustainable design or responsible design. I also love the fact that you've already found out some vendors that are supporting those same efforts. And you mentioned having a vendor or a subcontractor, whoever, that says, I'm green. And I remember when some of the new fabrics were coming out years ago and they were talking about carbon footprint, and green didn't mean the same thing to every company. It could mean a variety of things. Tell me a little bit about, as you have dug into this idea of green, what are some of the different responses and answers that you've gotten on what it really means?
Well, you're absolutely right. The term green, and it's funny because we're always looking for the buzzword, whether it's eco-friendly, sustainable, green, they all mean different things to different people. And one of our wonderful resources within the industry is the Sustainable Furnishings Council. And they do some homework for us as well, because they'll go out there and they'll seek those companies that have met those values, so that they're a nice springboard for us. But the term is relative. And another big part of my business is education. It's really, really important for me to empower my clients, because I never feel like they're going to take that information and run away. If anything, it creates a stronger partnership between us. So they're usually hungry for even more knowledge. I try to educate my clients on what their expectations might be. So when they come to me and they say, oh, I have this great bamboo flooring I'd like to install because I know it's really green. And then I'll start to ask them questions like, where does that bamboo flooring coming from? Oh, it's coming from China. And then we'll have to have the discussion of, wait a minute, it's coming all the way from China. You'd probably be better off with non-bamboo flooring that's coming right from the town over. So sometimes we try to broaden their picture of what green means because, to be perfectly honest, there's no perfect product. Everything requires some sort of manufacturing. There's some sort of impact it makes on the environment. So we try to talk and sort of scale what's the most important thing for you. If the most important thing for you is that we buy something local, then there might be some other trade-offs as to what is green for you. So just like when I work with materials, just I'm sure you hear all the time, like everybody says, oh, I have to have granite. And they don't even know why they say that. I try to educate them on all their choices. And then if we still come back to that original choice, that's great. But sometimes people say things without really knowing what it means. So I feel like part of my job, especially as I'm trying to educate people on sustainable choices or green choices, is let's look at the big picture. If it's still green in your eyes, that's great. But if not, there might be some other things you haven't considered. So that's part of the vetting process with vendors too, is when they put their mission statement up, well, what does that really mean? Green to them might really be that they only work within a 150-mile radius. Maybe their wood is not always certified, but it's coming from forests that are within 150 miles, so their carbon footprint's real small. So we're always open to ideas, and I never want to shut any one person down because they might not have that perfect picture of what green or sustainable is, because when you dig deeper, there's usually more of a story. And that happens with everything, right? Trying not to pass judgment on things, but sort of listening to the whole thing before. So that's kind of how we gauge it. And it changes. What we consider green right now in 10 years will probably not. So giving yourself permission to make choices with the information you have at hand, knowing that sooner or later that might change, and that's okay.
I think that is so true. The definitions can be very much distorted, or not even distorted, maybe interpreted very differently. I remember one time, and I don't remember all the details, but there was this big movement to push back to cloth diapers instead of Pampers.
Mm-hmm.
And then somebody pushed back and said, but do you know how much bleach is used to go through and clean those diapers? You know what I mean? When you're talking about sending them back and forth to like a diaper company,
Sure.
Do you really understand what's happening to the environment for them to clean them, since they're like joint using these cloth diapers? What has to happen? And so then there's this comparison. They're like, well, I didn't even really think about that. I just thought about the sustainability of the cotton, not of the process that had to be used to clean the cotton versus something else. And so it's really, as you said, looking at the big picture, not just at the fact that it's bamboo, but the fact that it's got to come from China versus it may not be bamboo, but it's coming one town over. There's a bigger conversation.
Right.
It's not just about what it's made out of.
Right. And we want to celebrate the small differences too, because, like you said, your head's spinning. All of a sudden people are like, okay, this is too much information. Never mind. And so we also look back and say, okay, no. Let's just take a little step. And maybe for you, it is that the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go down the street to one of my favorite artists, and we're going to look there for our artwork. And I want them to feel good about the success of just that little thing, because, too much information is not such a good thing. My photographer, I remember once we had just finished a beautiful house, and it had taken us, 2 days. And he was just so remarkable. And I said, I'm going to put all of this on my social media. I want everybody to know how hard you work. And he's like, please don't do it. All they want is the magic at the end of the day. They don't necessarily want to know the process. So it's true that a lot of people just want the end product and the information. And I have to respect that everybody doesn't want to always know everything that went into it. There are going to be some people that are really excited about all those choices and information, but other people just want you to sort of steer them to one or two choices and say, here's how we can do our part. And they're like, perfect. So again, kind of understanding their client and what their tolerance is for all this really cool and fun stuff. It might be exciting to you, but it may be overwhelming to them. So we're always really cautious about giving too much information and having them back away because they feel like it's just too hard to make those choices. So we want to make it super easy for people to make the right choices.
You had also mentioned in the conversation that we had right before the podcast came on, it was a term that truthfully was new to me. And you have it termed as biophilic design.
Mm-hmm.
Tell our listeners a little bit about biophilic design because it totally fits in with exactly what you're saying. So there's a really great phrase for it. But tell us how that ties into all that you're doing.
I have a tendency to do this. I'll talk a little bit about when I went through and did my Clifton strengths too. I have a tendency to make something up and then find that it has a name. and it's kind of nice because it sort of reassures me that I'm on the right track. Biophilic design was a term coined in the 60s, but it's been around forever. And it's the idea that we naturally want to commune with nature. It's in our DNA to want to be surrounded by nature, be involved with nature, be grounded. But especially in the last 100 years, we've gotten more industrialized, we've gotten more urban, and our spaces have become more and more devoid of nature. So this idea, there's 14 principles in biophilic design, is that we're trying to figure out ways to bring nature back into our everyday life. And it's used a lot in like healthcare settings, corporate settings, Google, lots of hospitals where they can quantify the results. So in an example, going into a hospital or building a hospital from the ground up and making larger windows and making those windows look onto grass or trees versus the adjoining brick wall. And what they were finding by just doing something as simple as that they were reducing patient stays and they were elevating mood and their overall sense of well-being was increased. Things like in my tagline, it says that we weave color into our 5 earth elements. So to me, something like using greens and blues, which are very prevalent in nature, can help to elevate or change a mood. I use a lot of incense and things like that in my design because smell is such a huge thing for people, and bringing in something like cedar or fir in those essential oils really can change someone's mood or put them in a sense that they feel like they're back in nature. So it can be really complex. It can be very simple as bringing more plants in and things. So in our design, we try to always be respectful of how we can naturally bring sort of the outside in, which is another term that was coined for a long time. How do we bring nature in? And so it's funny because it's a thing now, but if we step back, it's what our minds and our hearts naturally want. It's just sometimes we don't live in the kind of areas that are conducive to that. I'm also live in New York City, so it's a complete playground for that experiment because you can go through your entire day and never see a single blade of grass. An environment like that becomes super important to help people to reconnect so that they can feel revitalized and refreshed. So that's kind of what we're starting to do. It's not done so much on a residential level. And so that's what I'm trying to do is to go into individual homes and introduce these concepts. And a lot of times when we'll do it, people will be like, oh, this seems so normal. And it is. We kind of call it the duh of design. It's stuff that you know you should be doing, but sometimes when we don't bring it to the forefront of our mind, we don't think about executing it.
So here's what's going on in my brain as we're talking. First of all, I've been to New York City, so I understand the concrete jungle, if you will, right? I know coming from the South, it felt cold to me on my first visit. I certainly love the life, the excitement, and the energy, but coming from a place where there's trees and grass and big flower mounds for every entrance to every subdivision all over the place, it was very different. But here's what I'm thinking. There should be like a whole case study on how Joanna Gaines's business just went crazy.
Yes.
Right. All right. Mm-hmm. And I watched on occasion. I'm not I wasn't a binge watcher or anything, but she does a lot of this in Texas, where she started bringing in the beams. Let's bring a little bit of the outside in. She didn't use, of course, biophilic design as a catchphrase, but she did say a lot. We're going to bring the outside in. And I almost wonder if those very natural elements, that very much connection to the past, the reuse of items, some of the same type of things that you've talked about, how that translates and how it translated into her show. But it also makes me think, based on what you're saying, that this type of design process, maybe,
Mm-hmm.
or design mindset, it can actually cross aesthetics. So it could be used in the heart of Waco, Texas, and it can be used in New York City. It could be used in mid-century modern, transitional, traditional, contemporary, because it's really about connecting to the 5 earth elements, but also to all of our senses, bringing that out in. Would you agree with that or disagree?
No, oh, absolutely. And I think it's just what Joanna does so well is Joanna. She doesn't stray from who she is. And this is a natural extension of who she is. So she's just doing what she thinks is right. And it just turns out to be that it's also in tune with nature. So, simple things like using wood or using something that's old that already has a history and a story. These are things that are nurturing to us. I went into a home once to stage, and they had done this wonderful wood ceiling throughout the entire place. And the realtor that was there said, it's the funniest thing. Everybody that walks into this house breathes more deeply and they seem relaxed, and we can't figure out why. And I said, look up. It's because of the wood. Because when you create wood in a space, and I think there's a number, it's like 40% wood content in a home helps to relax the prefrontal cortex, helps to lower your blood pressure. All of these things were happening naturally to people, but it seemed like a mystery to her. And when I gave her that information, she was almost giddy because it confirmed what she knew instinctually was going on, was that she just felt better in that house. So I think that's what Joanna does, right? Even if that's not your style, you walk into her house and what she creates is a sense of serenity and calm and reaching back into nature. And it may not even be your style. You may not have even known that, and you may not be able to duplicate in your own house, but you can take certain elements that you've found comforting in that. And you're right, it transcends through all design phases, because wood's wood, right? We can make a Louis XVI chair in wood work really well. If that's your style, we can make a mid-century Eames chair work as well. So these constant elements of nature can be transcended through any design style, which is really exciting and should be pretty freeing. So it doesn't have to be a piece of salvaged wood for it to work. It doesn't have to be certain things. It can be water in the form of candles in a bucket of water. It can be a waterfall. It can be lots of things. So hopefully the design styles end up freeing us, not constricting us.
So beautifully said. And I think that part of what I love about it is that it can be interpreted so many different ways. Like you said, it's not to be restrictive. It's really to be open. But it makes me also think about when you walk into a room and something's off, but you don't necessarily know that it's scale or proportion until you kind of learn what scale and proportion means. And then you go, oh, well, that's why that's too short, too tall, too wide, too whatever. And I think this probably is the same thing. It's something we all probably have this need for, or it has this calming effect. Even if we can't put our finger on what it is, it happens. It is just a natural thing. So I can bet you that the internet, when they hear this, is going to be going crazy with biophilic design and trying to understand it. So I appreciate that.
Well, good. I hope so. That would make me so happy.
Well, it makes me want to go dig into it more, even though I am, not actively practicing interior design these days. I do want to redo our basement. So I do have projects I want to do, and just really making sure that I even think to bring those elements in. Question for you, though. So you knew that this was important to you, that it aligned with your values. You started the design. Do you use it as a marketing tool so that then when people have the same desire can find you, you're already aligned? Or do you just open up to general design and then explain to your clients that this is what you do as part of a value statement? How do you use it in your business?
Those are great questions, because, even if you're living your best life, it's scary, right? Making a decision to design this way, I knew that I was going to lose some clients. And I think that we're notorious for wanting to say yes to everybody, and myself included in the beginning. I never wanted to say no. So if somebody had zero interest in this, I would sneak it in. So we just didn't necessarily talk about it. And to this day, there are clients that come to me for this, but there are a lot of clients that don't even know that this exists. And I always joke that my job is to give you something you don't even know you want. So in a way, we kind of always have this conversation. Some people are a little bit more open to it than others. So I do market it. When you're on my website, you'll definitely see that I have a bent towards this, but I don't ignore other kinds of design. We definitely talk about it. So if I have a client that's really big into wanting to redesign every year and throw away all the stuff they have, we have to have that conversation about the impact of that. And that's not really the way I work. So I may not be your perfect designer. You may not be my perfect client. That doesn't happen too often, but sometimes I have to have those conversations because we just don't align and there's just no way that we're going to. And that's hard, right? Because you want to meet everybody's needs and you want to be everything to everybody, at least in the beginning, until you realize that's just an impossibility. And then you can kind of go, okay, all right, let's shut off all the things I'm not. And then I can more boldly speak about what I am. But it's not easy. Like I said, there's some people that I can talk more easily about this. You know, I can say I'm a house whisperer to some people. Other people I would just scare away. So we can't talk about the house says this and the house says that to certain people. So it's always gauging who your audience is and knowing how much information you can share. But as the years have gone on, I've become more bold and more strengthened in what I can and cannot say. And I have to say kudos to you and the Better Business series I'm going through right now, because I'm redoing my vision and mission statement. And it's so nice, even though you've written it down maybe 10 years ago, it's so nice to go over it again and fine tune it and really make it broad enough to stand on, right? So I think sometimes I feel like our mission statement can sort of thin out. And so sometimes you need to take a step back and reinforce it, build it back up so that you can stand on it strongly. And that's what this has been so wonderful for me to go back and say, okay, what have I been doing? What do I feel bold enough and strong enough about to go out, even though it's scary, and really stand behind? So
Yeah.
I think it's working, but it's not without fear. It's not without fear, right? But that's how, you know, I love the phrase, if it excites you and scares you all at the same time, you should probably say yes. And so that's kind of how I feel we are as designers when we're really following our passion, is that it's scary to put yourself out there. But if you don't, if you're wishy-washy, then your clients will know that and you will know it too. So, you know, you're not doing anybody a favor.
That's right. And thank you for the kind words about the Better Business Coaching System. And I'll have a link to that in the show notes. I also heard you mention something earlier on in your sharing about the Clifton Strengths Finder. And one of the things that I'm a huge proponent of is not only knowing your why, right, which I go through a whole section on that, but going through and doing your Strengths Finder. It's a Gallup survey, if you will, kind of like a Gallup questionnaire. It's a Strengths Finder 2.0. And what I found, and I mean, I've still been going back. I was using mine again this week. I went through and I've shared on a couple of other podcasts. I opened up the whole 34 because one of the things I learned recently was your bottom 5 are your blind spots if you're not aware of them. And I wanted to see what my blind spots were in business, you know, based on my strengths. Where am I less strong, if you will? So anyway, I heard you talk about, as you've built this business, which we are so in agreement on, is you knew your values coming in. So you wanted to make sure that when you built this interior design business, that it aligned with your values. Now we also know that you know your why, which is going to be connected to the earth. We also know that you now know your strengths, because you mentioned doing the Clifton Strengths Finder. And now you've talked about being able to almost stand in that strength by reviewing your mission and reviewing your vision and making sure that everything's still tightened up and not so thinned out. That's a really great way to phrase that. I will say the more we really connect, by connect, I mean, Renee, not just say it, but to write it down and to kind of, for lack of a better term, chew it up and internalize it, like move it from our head to our heart, which is a really long way to travel sometimes, but really moving it in and accepting it and being okay with it. If somebody asked you to come in and to design a throwaway home every 18 months, that would go against who you are. And so what gives us the strength to stand up and to act in the face of fear and to be excited and fearful at the same time is truly knowing who we are. by knowing our why, knowing our values, knowing our strengths, knowing our loves and passions and desires, and then being willing to create a business model around that. So I love that even in a very organic conversation this morning, all of that has come out, that that's what you've built, and that should be celebrated.
Absolutely. And I cannot reiterate enough that doing this Strength Finder is amazing. What it did for me, as I talked about earlier, I have a tendency to be all these things and then go back and find why I am. When I did, and I got my top 5 strengths, which are, for me, it's includer, developer, connectedness, positivity, empathy. It was like, holy cow, of course this is what I'm going to do. And so it made perfect sense. And I would encourage everybody to do it because, one, it might validate what you're already doing, or 2, it might make you feel like, oh my gosh, there are so many more things I could do based on these strengths. And like you said, knowing your bottom 5 are hugely important too, because I find not only are they my weaknesses, but they might be one of my clients' real strengths. And it's important for me to understand what their strengths are and what my weaknesses are, because you know how you have those clients sometimes that just don't mesh, but you have to work with them. And understanding that, if, at least for me, quite often my weakness is their great strength, it helps me to understand how better I can strengthen those so that I can meet their needs a little bit more too. So I tell you, it's great. It did make me pause though, because my strengths don't necessarily put me into the world of design. When I looked at them, they put me more into the world of education and social work and things like that. So it made me pause and think, why would I have chosen this? But then when I went back and I tied it in, especially connectedness, because I feel this connectedness to the earth and to other people and a responsibility, it made perfect sense, because I couldn't just go out there and do the traditional interior design business, but I could do a business where I was able to connect the world, connect people, and educate them in a different style. So for a moment, I panicked and went, oops, maybe this is not my profession. But then I went, yes, it is, as long as I'm making sure that I'm aligning with the values that I first created with the company. So it's so much fun to do the test too. I didn't find a whole lot of surprises, but a few, and to sort of define and understand how best you work, because I think that it's huge when it comes to clients. As a matter of fact, from this, I've developed a simpler sort of questionnaire that I'm giving to my clients so that I can better understand a little bit who they are, and that we can make sure that we align and that I can speak a little bit of their language to them as well. So it's a game changer, I think.
Excellent. You know, what's so funny is a couple of your strengths are my weaknesses.
That doesn't surprise me at all, Michelle.
Yeah. A couple of the things that you're really strong in that were in your top 5 were in my bottom 5. But I've got to tell you, I think it's those things that actually draw me to you. Because one of the things about StrengthsFinder is you're told to strengthen your top 10 and to navigate your 11 through 34. So it doesn't tell you to strengthen them. It tells you to work around them or to navigate them. And of course, the more you are aware of them and the more you navigate them, they actually kind of become stronger in you. And so it was so funny when I saw what mine were. I sent them to my husband. He's like, well, duh, of course we knew that's where you weren't the strongest.
Right.
But it made me stop and think, to your point, how's that shown up in my life? How's it showing up in my business? How's it showing up in my hiring? How's it showing up in, all different areas? And now let me look at the other people that I feel this affinity towards and maybe why. And sometimes it's because it's not my strength and it's theirs, and I'm attracted to that.
Exactly. And that's perfectly the way, we see it too, is that there's definitely qualities that I admire in other people. And I think, oh my goodness, even in my daughter is very much like you. She's a driver with a smile, right? She gets out there and she gets it done. She's in charge and she's large, but she's also got great empathy and kindness. And I just marvel at it. And I find myself attracted to that, because while I probably cannot be that 100%, I can definitely sort of emulate that and find the pieces of your personality or her personality that I can embrace and learn to be a little bit, more like. And I love it. I think it's really great.
So, Rainey, when you started this business again, now that we know, lining up with kind of, in my idea, all of who God made you to be and all of the experience that you had to that point, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Did you go into it thinking, I want to educate, I want to design differently, I want to put my mark in the world, and I want to be wildly profitable at the whole time? Where did profit fit in, or the idea of profit, when you were trying to put this biophilic design out into the world?
Mm-hmm. No, not at all. I'm a great believer that, you're only given as much as you can handle. So at the time, yes, those were visions in my mind. Did I have any idea that I could make a living at it or be profitable? Not at all. As a matter of fact, my first job, and I encourage all new designers to do this, was for a nonprofit, and I wasn't paid. And I think that that's a wonderful way to start, is to volunteer for somebody who has no money and no resources, and you have time on your hands because you don't have another job. And so it was funny. My very first job was not going to be profitable at all, but I knew that profit came in many forms. And even though it wasn't going to be financially profitable for me, I knew going into it that I was going to make relationships, and they still have lasted a lifetime. When you work on a completely volunteer project, it's people you want to work with. When your plumber comes in on a Sunday morning and he's working for free, or your carpenter's working till 9 o'clock at night because he's coming from another job, that later on, these are people that you want to work when you are making money. And the exposure that we got in kind, even though they couldn't pay us, so much magazine exposure and things like that. So I think I knew early on that I had to be careful not to judge profit by just the money, but that I had to look at the bigger picture and say, I could profit by networking, by learning from tradesmen, by working with magazines and media, that it would sort of build. And that can be scary if day one out of the box, you need to be making money. I was blessed enough to be able to do it on a part-time basis to begin with. So I didn't have the pressure of, oh my gosh, I have to right out of the box make a lot of money. And then that sort of came, and it's up and down. Being a creative business owner is a little bit of an oxymoron, because that's certainly not my strength. And I know it's not the strength of a lot of designers. My accountant will say that I could probably just rent out the left side of my brain, because it's mostly, I lean to the right. I lean to the right. I'm so creative. So I've had to really step up my game with that. And it doesn't come easy to me, as I know it doesn't come to a lot of people, but I've really learned. And again, going through your business series here too, not sticking your head in the sand, and owning the best and the worst of your business, and embracing that these are your weaknesses, learning and surrounding yourself with people that know more than you do, which I try to do on a daily basis, and you get through it. But I remember when I first started, if I knew what I was doing now back then, I would have said, no, I couldn't do it. I never would have thought I could be the kind of business owner and have the financial savvy that I do now. Back then, I would have said, oh, there's just no way. So fortunately, I knew just enough to say yes, and learned along the way and embraced the mistakes. I'm reading a great book now called Forged in Crisis by Nancy Kane, and it really talks about what it takes to be a leader. And a lot of what takes to be a leader is triumph during huge mistakes, like maybe life-changing, altering mistakes, and figuring out how to navigate those and be a better person for it. So I'm trying really hard to embrace all the little stuff or big stuff that comes up sometimes when you don't have financial successes, or, you mismanage a project, or something just happens, and you say, okay, learn from that, moving on. So it's been quite a process with the profit. But I think the biggest thing is looking at the bigger picture of what profitable is, and not just thinking it's the numbers.
Oh, so much goodness in this. A couple of things that are I want to just kind of highlight, if you will, is if you are in a position that you can do, as you said, a nonprofit, or somebody who cannot pay you, something where you're giving at the beginning. The beautiful thing is, yes, they're not paying you. So that opens it up. Not that they don't expect good work, but it opens you up to try things, processes, design ideas that maybe you would not feel as free to try in a paid situation. I also love, just like hands in the air shaking here, that you started seeing which contractors, which subs were going to show up and do that kind of work. Those are your people, right?
Mm-hmm.
People who are there. It also made me think immediately, if I remember correctly, two of your strengths were hit immediately with that empathy and connectedness.
Mm-hmm.
You know, empathizing with whatever the mission was behind the nonprofit, and then the connectedness of people in that. Also seeing that profit would show up later. This was almost like, to me, I almost see this as an internship. You set up your own small internship here to say,
Mm-hmm.
let me give this a shot. And I think that is super. Now, we also know you can't live full time on that. So
Yeah.
I certainly wouldn't suggest that, unless you are not trying to do it as a business, that that's not the way you can set it up for the next 10 years. But to get started, beautiful. And they're always looking for people that would do that for them. I also want to mention, was the book Forged in Crisis? Is that what you said?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. I'll put that in the show notes. I also want to give a shout out to the book that I love by John Maxwell called Failing Forward. And I also want to give another shout out to the podcast episode on shame, which talks about when we have an error that's not corrected, it becomes a mistake. If you have a mistake that's not corrected, it can become a failure. But if we can learn from them and we can shift it and change it and let it be a teacher for us, which sounds very similar and really high level to Forged in Crisis, it actually becomes a huge learning tool. And so those are just some things that our listeners can go back and listen to.
Right.
So, Renee, you have now moved a little bit forward in your design, and you are part of a collaboration, a co-op.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us a little bit about how that began and what that looks like in your area.
Absolutely. So, going again back to my strengths, it made sort of perfect sense when I looked at them. I was like, of course, that's what I'm going to want to do, because my number one strength is includer. So it's always really important to me to rally around, include everybody, make sure that everybody is listened to, everybody has a place at the table. And along those lines, too, I was finding, and I think that this is true for a lot of us that run our own business, it's lonely work. You can spend an entire day in your office by yourself on a computer looking at a screen, and you look up at 5 o'clock and you haven't spoken to anybody in 8 hours. And so that was happening to me as well. I would go through my days or weeks, and you talk to people all day long, but you don't have perhaps that camaraderie that something like a co-op or a collaboration would bring. And I looked around and I saw these other wonderful designers that I thought, what the heck? And it happened to be, again, because now, while I can't volunteer solely for nonprofits, it's always within the fabric of our design company. So I'm still doing those. Right now, we run a holiday house tour every year where we have like 800 people come through 5 wonderfully designed homes, and all the money goes towards a nonprofit called Women-Aid. And what happened was I had collected these designers that, again, put in 100 hours right before Christmas to create these stunning designs. And I looked at these 5 designers and thought, again, holy cow, if there's anybody that I want to collaborate with, it's you gals, because you know what it's like to give up time, money, your family. These are people that I would love to have in my fold. So those were the 5 gals that I asked. And I knew, because I'd worked with them, that while their strengths were different than mine, collectively we had the same vision. And that was that we were not competitive by nature. And we've never had thought, oh, this is mine, get yours. And I think that was a really huge part of the success of our collaboration, is that we never felt threatened by anybody. We always felt that we could comfortably celebrate our differences and our sameness. We started out sort of, everybody had their own specialty, but truth be told, we do a whole lot of overlapping, and it's still okay, because I think we always bring to the forefront of our mind, there's abundance, there's work for everybody. Even when times are lean, we still put that energy out that don't worry about this. Share your resources, share your knowledge. It's going to come back to you. And sort of as a senior member of the team, I again, loving to educate and include, I do a lot of that, because a lot of them are just starting out, or they haven't been in business quite as much. So I do a lot of, oh, how about this? How about that? And there are times where I just wish, oh my gosh, I wish in the beginning there was somebody that could tell me, what does a side mark mean? What in the world does that mean? What's FFE mean? And all of these terms that I had to figure out on my own. And now I am just beyond pleased to be able to have a group of people that I can share that with. And at the same time, they can come in and say, oh my gosh, okay, I just had this amazing thing happen to me. Let me share it with you. And we can go, oh, that's a great way to handle that. We'll be doing that too. And then from a practical standpoint, we share resources. And for some of these larger accounts, you don't want Kravit knocking on your door saying, how come you're not doing your $20,000 a year? Now, all of a sudden, I've got 4 other people that are putting in orders too. So we share the accounts. We share the wealth. We bring our receipts forward. And if somebody has to pay for books, everybody chips in. We have a communal space where everybody pays rent equally and utility equally. So the nuts and bolts of it are that we are very forthcoming and upfront about what our expenses and what our needs are going to be. We don't necessarily have roles, but we all understand that we contribute equally to it. So it has worked out wonderfully for us at this time. Now, it could change in 6 months, and that's fluid too, and that's all right. We're excited to embrace those changes. So if somebody comes to us in 6 months and says, hey, you know what? I've got this great opportunity. I'm going to start my own, business in my own storefront, 5 miles away from here. We'll be there to cheerlead them on as well.
So Renee, just make sure I understand and to clarify for the listeners. So in this co-op, you have a shared location, so a shared space. Is it a big open concept or is it offices?
No, it's big. We started out and we had some offices and then we changed our location. So we are in a big old room. So the downside of it is that we're talkers and sometimes we don't get as much done because we're chatting it up, but that's okay too. So it's one big open space. And what's lovely about that is where, I would be paying solely for one space. Now it's 1/5 of that, 1/6 of that. So from an economic standpoint, for a lot of people just starting out, it makes so much more sense to make a small investment, but to still have a place where your clients can come and you have a resource center and things like that. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So in this space, and you'll have to send me a space and I'll put it on the Instagram stories when we do this. Okay. So take a few pictures, send them to me.
Okay.
And we'll be able to show our listeners so they can understand.
Mm-hmm.
So if we have this one big space, do you have then 5 individual desks and you each kind of have your own little area where you can have some of your own personal things. And then you have a shared space for like a small design or resource center?
Exactly. Yes. We all have our own individual desks and then we have a big drafting table. And that's where we'll just sort of put community, like we have to pull out our samples, or if you want to have a meeting with a client, that space is, the only thing we ask is at the end of the day, and that usually means it's me because I'm the messiest for the group. I put away my samples and I don't leave everything on the table, but we use that as our resource when we're pulling things together.
Do you find that at the beginning people felt threatened, especially if you would bring in a client to stand in the middle of 4 other designers sitting at their desk working? Was that disruptive? And did they feel like, oh my gosh, if I bring my client in here, somebody might take them? Or how did you work out kind of those feelings and thoughts?
Right. Because it's really, that's the key, right? First of all, we would say, hey, I've got somebody come into the office, and we sort of give that person their space. We've never needed to be all in there all the time. So that's easy. I think in the beginning, I tried to create, and I still do, an atmosphere that is non-threatening. And I didn't even know that it was threatening because I've only ever worked this way because again, my goal is always to be a collaboration, is always to work together. So I guess I naively thought everybody.
But don't you think, Renee, that's because of the includer and the connectedness? That's your natural way of seeing the world.
Yes.
Where there are quite a few other people that that's not their strength. They're going to see it very differently.
Absolutely. And it's not going to be the right thing for them. I didn't know any differently until I got out there and we started talking about this, and people are like, oh, no, this would not fly. And I started hearing other designers, and I thought, based on their personalities, you're right, this wouldn't fly. So it's interesting because we've had other people that have wanted to come into the group, but we know that it wouldn't work because that's not in their mind. And now, so the other designers may not have includer in their strengths. It might be down low, but I think I've created this sort of atmosphere where it's the camaraderie. And I'm not saying it's perfect because I'm sure that there are people that, like, oh gosh, that should have been my client. That was my ideal client. Why isn't and you have those thoughts inside your head and they stay there. And then you kind of go, okay, let's talk about this. Why am I feeling this? And we don't necessarily talk about it with each other, but sort of internally, and then say, okay, I'm going to acknowledge that. Maybe I wish that was my client, but it's not. And there's a reason for that. So let's move on. So I think sometimes it starts with whomever wants to create the co-op, making sure that the guidelines are real strong. And that's also knowing the strengths of your other designers. And so I had the benefit of having worked with these gals. Now, if you're going out there and you're putting on Craigslist, I'd like 5 designers to do this co-op, you're really going to have to do your homework. And even if you do, you may not know that this is the right thing. So you might have to be fluid the first 6 months. And so it might be a space that you have for a short amount of time, just as you're trying to figure out whether this is all working and what the guidelines might be. But I think that there are definitely some personalities that would not work. And so that setup, is not perfect. And there's no right or wrong. It's not, it just happens to work for us, and it happens to work for us in the area that we are. I think we're really blessed that the town we live in is sort of like this. We're a very inclusive kind of town. It's funny, New Hampshire, I think we ranked like 49th on charitable giving, but we ranked like first or second on donating our time and our energies and our love. So I think the town is sort of like that. So we have this sort of rally around kind of feel, let's all work together and make something that's good even better. So we might have been fortunate in the fact that we were brought together that way. But I think that the pluses far outweigh the minuses in camaraderie, in bouncing ideas off people, in sharing expenses. But it's not without its challenges.
And not feeling alone.
Right?
Yeah, and just not feeling alone.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So then, if I understand again correctly, these are 5 individual business owners. So 5 designers who each own their own companies.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Sharing a space, sharing resources, and then sometimes sharing ideas. So this is a beautiful thing that if you go, hey, I need to just bounce a quick idea, my assumption is that would be very reciprocal in nature among the 5 of you. But I would also imagine that if you needed a skill set, say somebody was really great at CAD drawings or something that you needed that you didn't have, that you could also maybe subcontract out to your fellow designer sitting 2 desks over to perform a task or to help you on something, or even to collaborate on a project. Do you go that far with it?
Absolutely, we do. And it's wonderful because all of us have our own favorite contractors, our own favorite plumbers, or, whatever it is. But we can find that like, oh my gosh, my contractor is really busy. Hey, Jay, who do you use? And she can say, oh, well, he's in between jobs. Why don't you take? So we find that all of a sudden, exponentially, we have not just 2 contractors, maybe we have 10 contractors, or we have not just 1 CAD designer, we have 3, so it's really wonderful in that. And we can say, hey, this designer referred me, and they're much more likely to respond to us because they've had that working relationship. And we have found that our clients like that we can do this too, because we've shown them that we have a certain measure of built-in collaboration. So perhaps they assume that we're the kind of designers that might have good listening skills, might be more tolerant in those type of things. So when other people, potential clients hear about us, sometimes they shake their heads and say, how can all 5 of you be doing the exact same thing in the same space? And then they go, oh my gosh, but they are. Maybe this is the kind of person I want to work with. So we've found that it sort of had this ripple effect on the community and how they think of us. And what we hope to do is to make it the norm so that people, do maybe perhaps in other industries, because there is that trend nationwide now with WeWork and all of those places where people of like minds come into their own public space and you rent a desk or whatever it is. So it's not a new concept. It just might be a little bit more new to designers because I think they're used to working in design firms or there's a boss and you're an employee. But we didn't want any of that. I didn't want the messiness of employees or even subcontractors. I wanted all the fun.
Yeah, you just wanted to be around other like-minded individuals to share and to do life together and business together.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
So how has this work environment, Renee, how do you think it's impacted the profitability for your company and for the company of the other designers involved?
Oh my, I can't even begin to explain. It's been so wonderful. Because like I said, we've been able to branch out, or in some cases, say specifically, okay, I'm going to work on this now because I have a friend, this colleague that does renovations, and that's what her specialty is. So maybe I can offload some of the stuff I don't do so well and have her collaborate with me and actually make not less money, but more money because I can focus on what I do best. So we've been able to really hone in. We've got a gal who's a stager, and I can say, okay, here, you go ahead and take that stager, and maybe I can add a little bit of something onto her, but then it can free me back up. So I think it's really given all of our businesses an opportunity to be more financially profitable. And then again, talking beyond that profit of just pure dollars, the idea that we can sort of expand our knowledge and our field has been super helpful to us, because we know things now that we've never known before. I'd say every other day somebody's coming to me and saying, oh, I found this great company. Did you know about them? Like, nope, no idea. And then all of a sudden I'm able to show my client that too. And we're going down a different avenue and we didn't even know about it. So I think that's one of the most exciting things is that everybody on their own researches wonderful companies, and we all benefit from that. So there's stuff I just wouldn't know without them.
Which I think points back again to making sure that a co-op is only as strong as each member.
Yeah.
And so there really does need to be this merging of, in some way, like minds, like businesses, like values, right? Even if the businesses aren't just the same, and a huge amount of respect for each other. And I love how you have explained once again the profitability of all of it, not just the numbers come, but there is something about the profitability of getting up and going to work and not going to work by yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And that we cannot underestimate that, especially when connectedness and people are important to many of us. To feel like we have to get up and do it alone every day is very isolating. And just that can change the way somebody feels. And I am so thankful that, when you and I were talking about this a month or so ago, and you had mentioned it when you took the Pricing Without Emotion course last year. And I was like, oh, wow, I want to dig into that a little more.
Mm-hmm.
So, Reedy, if you were to share your advice with someone who wanted to start something similar in their area, first, I want to give a big shout out and just say, don't be afraid to try it. But what advice would you give to them for maybe one or two things that they could do to get their mindset right, to get it started or to try it out?
Right. Well, again, I'll go back to the, you know what you know. So if you have a couple of designers that you respect, that you value their opinions, you value their time, and perhaps you've had an opportunity in the past to collaborate with them, I think that's a great starting point, because those are people that are tried and true to you and them, and they kind of know your style, they know your strengths and your weaknesses a little bit more. So I think that even if it ends up just being one person, that's okay too, because once you plant that seed and you tell a couple people what you might be doing, you'd be surprised that that might expand upon itself. We in the beginning made sure that all the local newspapers knew what we were doing, because while we knew it wasn't a novel idea in big cities, we knew it might have been a novel idea for our little town. So the first thing we did when we all got together is we reached out to our local newspaper and said, we have this really cool thing that we're doing. And they were all over it. And so we got exposure right then and there, which again helped our profitability, but also let other designers know, hey, we're doing this thing. And if they read about it and thought it was a good idea, they would reach out to us, and then we could kind of start the process. We ended up not adding any more because 5 was a lot in office. But if somebody started out with just 1 or 2 people and had this idea, they might be able to get just the number they need. I am not sure how many people is the right number. It's going to be individual for everyone. 5 seems to work for us too, because if we're all in the office, like we said, it's half a day's gone by and we've caught up on all our kids and all our activities, and we haven't done a lot of work. So sometimes you have to limit the number just because of the sheer volume of it. But we're also small enough that we socialize with each other. We'll say like we're going out next week for drinks. And when it's a small enough number, you might find yourself, it's not just your business, it's also your pleasure too. So I would say looking for people that you've already worked with, and it doesn't necessarily have to be another designer. You could decide it would be a great idea to have an architect and a CAD person and a builder. Does your builder feel like he just needs a space to be in where he's away? So think beyond just other designers. Think about other tradespeople that might be helped by this as well. And you might find that you're still going to have enough in common that you're going to have that camaraderie. And then advertise it. Celebrate that you're doing this. Let local radio stations and newspapers know that you're doing this, because I think it's a good lifestyle story as well. And it just gets people knowing who you are. So we're a big advocate of going after free advertising, and doing little things like this usually gets you noticed.
I love how you're talking about sharing it with the community, because I do think it pulls the community together. And especially when you are in an area that is something that is encouraged, it's good for the businesses in the area to see other businesses are working together, because sometimes they think that one designer hates the next, or one lawyer hates the next. They don't know that half the time these designers, the majority of them are friends, and they socialize and they're doing things. So then to be able to put out there, hey, we're all kind of in this life together, this journey together, and we are supportive of each other, I think it lends a huge amount of credibility, but also respect to each of you individually. And so I applaud the way that you have created this, you are doing this, working through it and the challenges. We could probably have you back on and talk a whole another time about the challenges of this.
Sure.
Right. I mean, it's not just one-sided, as we know, and you have alluded to, but it's worth it. I think that's the thing. That'd be like saying that, we always talk about the pretty part of design. We could have 10 podcasts on the challenges of design. There is both sides of it, but it's worth it, is what you're sharing with us today.
And if you don't have the struggles, you don't grow, right? If it's all pretty, there's no irritation, right? It's like you don't get the pearl without the oyster, without it being irritated. That's the way you sort of embrace it, going, okay, here's a struggle. We can get through this, and this is probably going to produce something even greater. So, when we have issues, that's kind of the way we view it, and we get past it a lot faster that way too.
Right. It's almost having the discussion up front. How are we going to deal with these things that either are irritants or that are disruptions? How are we going to stop and have a conversation about it?
Exactly. Yep. That's it.
So, Renee, what's one of the next profit goals in your business?
Starting to put back into play some of the mission statements and things like that I put down, because a few things have changed. And so now as I go back and I'm trying to incorporate a little bit more strongly, actually using the words like biophilic design, those are our next challenges. And another thing that I'm really working on, and I was really blessed this fall to have an opportunity to take sort of a sabbatical. I worked really, really hard for 3 quarters and tried to pretend as if they were 4 and get all of a year's business into 3 quarters so I could take the last one off, which is kind of what I'm doing now. So, and I know that so few of us have the opportunity to do that, but getting a chance to dream. And when you're in the middle of it and you're working 16 hours a day, there is just no time to afford that. So one of my goals has been to spend this last quarter rethinking. Rachel Carson calls it gathering years. She had gathering years in between her really important business where she didn't have time to devote the way she wanted to her projects, but she kept writing, she kept tinkering, she kept doing little things along the way, and they ended up being more impactful than if she had just plowed right through and never stopped. So I'm taking this next couple of months as I'm rewriting the business plan and looking at my strengths and weaknesses and how to propel the business forward, to really dream and settle in and go down a rabbit hole or two and learn new things. Because I'm a big advocate of whatever information you learn, you can employ that, especially in design. Whatever you specialize in, whatever your talent is what you're going to be known for, and it's all good. So those are my next goals, and I'm hoping that it translates into greater dollars, and I think it really will. But sometimes we have so little time to recharge our batteries that we're just sort of running on instinct. And so there are clients peppered in here and there because I don't want to lose that. But I'm really taking to heart the whole idea of just sort of getting my hands into the clay and kind of, seeing what's happening and seeing what I'm molding, and giving myself permission to really think outside the box, which is kind of how I do my design. When we first design, we put all sorts of wacky ideas on the table. If you want an indoor pool, let's put it there. I do all of this sort of like thinking outside the box, and then it's all on the table. And all the stuff that doesn't belong eventually finds its way off of it, and you're left with the great design. So that's kind of what I'm trying to do with the business now. What's the craziest thing I could possibly be doing in the next 1 or 3 or 5 years? What's the most practical thing? And letting them sit on the table for a little while and exploring all those different ideas, and then seeing, okay, what's my tolerance level for this? What could I really accomplish? What would it require in finance, in support, and all of those things, and then kind of directing the business from there. So that's the plan.
I love it. And, I think that's also where the Better Business Coaching comes in, the system that I have that you and I had talked about. And that's why we talked about this being the perfect season, if you will, to go through that, because it really invites you to stop and to think about these things, which are the areas that, like you said, we sometimes are just doing. We are just in the process of doing. And if we don't stop and pour back into ourselves and really think, the business we have 10 years later may not be the business we really wanted. And so this sabbatical that you're taking, this opportunity, I think you called it the gathering years. I love that. Just a gathering time, a gathering season, having that to be able to stop and really go, okay, for this next phase of my business, of my life, what could it look like? How will profitability show up in relationships, in work, in money, in all of those things? What is it going to take? Am I willing to do that? Am I not willing? Mm-hmm. Just even the idea of your tolerances, right? So I applaud you. I support you. And I'm so excited that you are taking the time. And I also love how you did it with a plan. You didn't just wake up on October 1st and think, I'm taking the last 3 months off. You made comment that you started planning for it at the beginning of the year. How can I do this to be able to take that last quarter off? And so you came into it with a plan. You're now planning, but with a lot of freedom. And I'm certain that when you step back and come off of your sabbatical in whatever way that is, that it's going to be done again with forethought, with planning, but also with open hands, that it can shift a little bit and come off the table if it doesn't fit, even after you try it.
Right, exactly. Mm-hmm.
So Renee, where can people find you?
They can find me on our website, which is MandevilleCanyonDesigns.com. We are on Facebook, we are on Instagram and LinkedIn. I have a blog that is linked through my website, so you can see all the cool things that we're exploring or celebrating. That's a really big part of it. That's where I get a chance to get my little educational tidbits and things like that out there. And then we're in our little town. So if you're ever in Exeter, New Hampshire, we're running all over the town there too.
Excellent. Well, I will have all of those links in our show notes today so that everybody can find you. But Renee, I really just want to thank you for taking time to share about your design aesthetic and your views and what you are doing to bring the environment in and to be sustainable and responsible. And then also to share the concept and the idea of how you can create a co-op of other people that are doing very similar jobs in a very supportive environment. So thank you so much for your time today. Though I just could explain, this podcast is just a beautiful time together. And, I feel uplifted for my day. So thank you for bringing that.
Well, thank you so much as well. I've got a big smile on my face, and I'm figuring that's probably going to continue through the entire day, Michelle. So thank you too.
You're welcome. Take care.
Thank you. You too. Bye-bye.
Talking with Renee today was such a pleasure, and it makes me want to go and do more research on nature and design and co-ops. And I bet you were inspired by something in today's podcast as well. Renee mentioned the Better Business Coaching System. You can join this online coaching system on my website, scarletthreadconsulting.com, and make sure you select Better Business Coaching System under courses. I would love to help you gain the clarity that Renee is finding. No matter what, I want you to remember this: profit doesn't happen by accident.